The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Sunset Station gas station as Marcus Rodriguez pulled his unmarked black sedan up to pump number 7. After 18 months of deep undercover work infiltrating a human trafficking ring, he was finally heading home to his family in Portland. The case had been grueling: fake identity, fake job, fake life, all to bring down Vincent the Wolf Castellano and his network of criminals who preyed on vulnerable immigrants. Marcus stepped out of his car, stretching muscles that ached from the 12-hour drive. His beard had grown scraggly during the operation, and his clothes, a worn flannel shirt and faded jeans, were carefully chosen to maintain his cover as a drifter looking for construction work. Even though the case was wrapped up and Castellano was behind bars, old habits died hard. He'd learned to blend in, to become invisible, to observe everything while appearing to notice nothing. As he reached for the gas nozzle, a pristine white BMW X7 screeched into the station, music blaring from its premium sound system. The SUV lurched to a stop at the pump directly across from his, close enough that he could smell the new car scent mixed with expensive perfume wafting through the open windows. From the driver's seat emerged a woman who looked to be in her early 20s, her long blonde hair perfectly styled despite the Oregon wind. She wore a designer tracksuit that probably cost more than most people made in a month, complete with matching sneakers that had clearly never touched anything dirtier than a marble floor. Everything about her screamed privilege, from her manicured nails tapping impatiently on her phone screen to the way she surveyed the gas station like it was beneath her standards. "Ugh, this place is so gross," she announced loudly to whoever was on the other end of her phone call, making no effort to lower her voice. "I can't believe Daddy makes me drive myself to Portland. Where's the service in this state?" Marcus continued filling his tank, but his trained ears picked up every word. Years of surveillance work had taught him to listen to conversations that might seem meaningless to others. This girl was clearly from money, probably never worked a day in her life, and expected the world to cater to her every whim. The blonde girl, who couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, hung up her phone and looked around the gas station with obvious disdain. Her gaze landed on Marcus, taking in his rough appearance, his older model car, and the way he moved with the economical precision of someone who'd learned not to waste energy on unnecessary gestures. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying the particular tone of someone who'd never been told no in her entire life. "You there in the flannel?" Marcus looked up, meeting her eyes with the neutral expression he'd perfected during his undercover work. "Yes?" "I need you to pump my gas," she announced, not asked, holding up one perfectly manicured hand. "I just got my nails done, and I'm not about to ruin them touching that disgusting pump handle." The request was so absurd that Marcus almost laughed. In all his years of law enforcement, from beat cop to detective to federal agent, he'd encountered entitled people before, but this was something else entirely. The girl stood there expectantly, as if it was perfectly normal to demand that complete strangers provide her with personal service at a public gas station. "I'm sorry, but I'm not an employee here," Marcus replied calmly, turning back to his own car. "You'll need to pump your own gas or find an attendant." The girl's expression shifted from surprise to indignation faster than Marcus could track. Clearly, she wasn't used to being refused anything, especially not by someone she perceived as being beneath her social status. "Look," she said, her voice rising with each word, "I don't think you understand who I am. My mother is Karen Whitmore. Maybe you've heard of her? She sits on the board of directors for half the businesses in this state. One phone call from her could make or break someone like you." Marcus had indeed heard of Karen Whitmore, though not in any context that would impress her daughter. The Whitmore name had come up several times during his investigation into West Coast money laundering operations. Nothing concrete enough to build a case on, but enough to flag them as persons of interest in financial crimes. The mother was known for using her wealth and connections to intimidate anyone who didn't bow to her family's demands. "That's very impressive," Marcus said, his voice remaining level despite the growing crowd of onlookers who had begun to gather. "But I'm still not going to pump your gas for you." The girl's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. She was clearly not used to being denied, especially not in front of an audience. Several other customers had stopped what they were doing to watch the confrontation unfold, some filming with their phones, others simply staring in amazement at the spectacle. "Do you have any idea what kind of car I'm driving?" she demanded, gesturing wildly at the BMW. "This vehicle costs more than you probably make in 5 years. I am not the kind of person who pumps her own gas. That's what people like you are for." The casual cruelty in her words hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. During his undercover work, he'd met countless people who were struggling to make ends meet, working multiple jobs just to keep their families housed and fed. The idea that someone would look down on honest work, would assume that manual labor, made someone less worthy of respect, violated every principle he'd been raised with. "People like me?" Marcus repeated, his voice carrying an edge that made several nearby customers take a step back. Years of interrogating hardened criminals had taught him how to project authority when necessary. "Yes, people like you," the girl continued, apparently oblivious to the dangerous shift in Marcus's demeanor. "Working class, blue collar, the kind of people who exist to make life easier for those of us who actually contribute something meaningful to society." The gas station had gone almost completely quiet now, with everyone within earshot focused on the confrontation. The girl seemed to be feeding off the attention, becoming more theatrical with each passing moment. "My family employs hundreds of people just like you," she announced, turning slightly to address the growing crowd. "We give you jobs, we pay your salaries, we keep this economy running. The least you could do is show some gratitude and help. Me out when I ask nicely." "You didn't ask nicely," Marcus pointed out, his FBI training kicking in as he began to catalog every detail about the girl and her behavior. "You demanded. There's a difference." "Oh, please," she scoffed, pulling out her phone again. "I'm calling my mother right now. She'll have you fired from whatever minimum wage job you're working. She'll make sure you can't get hired anywhere in this state." As she dialed, Marcus noticed something that made his investigative instincts sharpen. The girl was nervous, more nervous than someone should be over a simple confrontation at a gas station. Her hands were shaking slightly as she held the phone, and she kept glancing around as if looking for an escape route. There was something else going on here, something beneath the surface of entitled behavior. "Mom?" the girl said when the call connected, her voice taking on a whining little girl quality. "Mom, there's this horrible man at the gas station who's being incredibly rude to me. He won't help me pump my gas, and now he's being threatening." Marcus could hear Karen Whitmore's voice through the phone, sharp and demanding, though he couldn't make out the specific words. Whatever she was saying, it was making her daughter more confident, more aggressive. "Yes, I'm at the Sunset Station on Highway 26, the girl continued. "Can you send someone to deal with this? He's making me feel very unsafe." The manipulation was masterful, Marcus had to admit. In the span of 30 seconds, the girl had transformed herself from an entitled brat making unreasonable demands into a victim being threatened by a dangerous stranger. It was exactly the kind of behavior he'd seen from white-collar criminals who were used to talking their way out of consequences. When she hung up the phone, the girl's demeanor had completely changed. Gone was the imperious attitude, replaced by what appeared to be genuine fear and distress. "My mother is sending security," she announced to the crowd, her voice trembling. "This man has been harassing me, trying to intimidate me because I'm a young woman alone. Thank God there are witnesses here." The crowd's sympathy began to shift, and Marcus could see doubt creeping into the faces of the people around him. The girl was good at this, probably had years of practice manipulating situations to her advantage. But Marcus had spent too many years dealing with liars and con artists to be fooled by the performance. "That's interesting," he said, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who was. Marcus had faced down armed criminals in dark alleys, stared into the eyes of human traffickers who'd sold children like livestock, and walked into trap houses where a wrong word could mean death. But there was something uniquely satisfying about the moment when he reached into his back pocket and withdrew the leather wallet that held his federal credentials. "Actually," Marcus said, his voice taking on the unmistakable authority of law enforcement, "before we go any further with threats and intimidation, I think introductions are in order." He flipped open the wallet, revealing the gold shield and identification card that had taken him 12 years of dedicated service to earn. The badge caught the late afternoon sunlight, reflecting it back like a beacon of justice in the grimy gas station parking lot. "Special Agent Marcus Rodriguez, Federal Bureau of Investigation," he announced clearly, making sure his voice carried to every person in the growing crowd. "And you, Miss Whitmore, just made several very serious mistakes." The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Tank's hand jerked away from his concealed weapon as if it had suddenly caught fire. The color drained from his face so quickly that Marcus wondered if the man might actually faint. The other two bikers took an involuntary step backward, their tough guy postures evaporating like morning mist. But it was the girl's reaction that truly caught Marcus's attention. Instead of the shock and fear he'd expected, her expression went through a rapid series of changes: surprise, recognition, calculation, and finally what looked disturbingly like panic. This wasn't just embarrassment at being caught in bad behavior. This was the look of someone who had much bigger problems than a confrontation at a gas station. "FBI?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're FBI?" "That's right," Marcus confirmed, keeping his badge visible as he studied her reaction. "And right now, I'm trying to decide whether what I just witnessed constitutes attempted intimidation of a federal officer, conspiracy to commit assault, or if we want to start talking about the more interesting questions." "What interesting questions?" Tank asked, his earlier bravado completely gone. Prison tattoos or not, nobody wanted trouble with federal agents. Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Well, for starters, I'm curious about why Miss Whitmore here seems so familiar with using false accusations and hired muscle to solve her problems. That suggests a pattern of behavior that might be worth investigating." The girl, who still hadn't told him her first name, was now visibly shaking. I don't know what you mean. This was just a misunderstanding. I was scared, and I called for help. That's not illegal." "You're right," Marcus agreed. "Calling for help isn't illegal. But filing a false police report is. Conspiracy to commit assault is. And threatening a federal officer definitely is." He took a step closer, his years of interrogation experience guiding his movements. "But what really interests me, Miss Whitmore, is why someone your age is so comfortable with manipulating authority figures and using hired intimidation. Those are skills that usually take time to develop. Practice, experience." The crowd around them had grown larger, with several people now openly recording the confrontation on their phones. Marcus made a mental note to collect that footage later. It might prove useful as evidence. "Tank, is it?" Marcus turned his attention to the lead biker. "I'm going to need to see some identification. All of you, actually. And I'll need to know what weapons you're carrying and whether you have permits for them." Tank's face went even paler. "Look, Agent Rodriguez, was it? We don't want any trouble. We just got a call saying someone was bothering Miss Whitmore. We came to check it out, that's all." "Uh-huh," Marcus nodded. "And the weapon you were reaching for when you threatened to teach me some manners? That was just for checking things out, too." The biker's silence was answer enough. Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the caller ID and felt his pulse quicken. Agent Sarah Chen, his partner on the trafficking case and one of the Bureau's top financial crimes investigators. "Rodriguez," he answered, keeping the phone on speaker so everyone could hear. "Marcus, thank God," Sarah's voice crackled through the speaker. "We've got a situation developing. That tip you called in about the Whitmore family's financial connections, it just broke wide open. We've been tracking some of their shell companies and—" "Sarah," Marcus interrupted, glancing meaningfully at the girl who was now standing, frozen like a deer in headlights. "I'm going to need you to hold that thought. I'm currently at a gas station in Oregon with one of the Whitmores, and the situation has become complicated." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You're with a Whitmore?" "Marcus, that family's about to be indicted on 14 counts of money laundering and racketeering. We've been trying to locate Karen Whitmore's daughter all day. She missed a scheduled interview with federal prosecutors this morning." The girl let out a strangled gasp, and Marcus saw Tank's hand move toward his jacket again. "I wouldn't," Marcus said quietly, his eyes never leaving the biker's face. "The situation just became a federal matter, and I've got backup coming whether I want it or not. Marcus, Sarah continued over the phone, the daughter, Madison Whitmore, she's not just connected to her mother's money laundering operation. We have evidence suggesting she's been actively recruiting for it, using her social media presence and college connections to identify potential victims for investment fraud schemes. Madison Whitmore. So that was her name. Marcus filed it away as he watched the girl's world collapse around her in real time. That's very interesting information, Agent Chen, Marcus said, maintaining eye contact with Madison. And would you happen to know what Miss Madison Whitmore was supposed to be discussing with federal prosecutors today? Her plea agreement, Sarah replied grimly. She was supposed to provide testimony against her mother and several co-conspirators in exchange for reduced charges. When she didn't show up, the U.S. attorney authorized a warrant for her arrest. Madison let out a sob and sank against the BMW, all pretense of composure finally abandoning her. I was scared, she whispered. I was driving to Portland to meet with the lawyers, but I got scared and I was going to run. Run where? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Mexico, she admitted, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. I have friends there, people who could help me disappear. Marcus looked around at the assembled crowd, Tank and his fellow bikers, the gas station customers, the employees who had emerged from the building to watch the drama unfold. What had started as a simple confrontation over entitled behavior had turned into the arrest of a federal fugitive. Tank, Marcus said, turning back to the lead biker. I'm going to assume that you and your friends here had no idea what you were walking into when you got that call from Karen Whitmore. The massive man nodded eagerly. No, sir, Agent Rodriguez. We just provide security services, nothing illegal. We had no idea about any of this federal stuff. Security services, Marcus repeated. Licensed and bonded security services? Tank's silence told him everything he needed to know about the legitimacy of their business. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd taken control of countless chaotic situations. Tank, you and your associates are going to very carefully remove any weapons you're carrying and place them on the ground. Slowly. Then you're going to provide identification and contact information to the Oregon State Police, who should be arriving shortly. As if summoned by his words, the distant sound of sirens began to echo across the landscape. Miss Whitmore, Marcus continued, you are under arrest for violation of federal bail conditions and failure to appear for a scheduled court proceeding. You have the right to remain silent. As he recited the Miranda warning that he'd memorized years ago, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on the strange turns his career had taken. 18 months ago, he'd been living in a decrepit motel room, pretending to be a down-and-out construction worker while infiltrating one of the most dangerous criminal organizations on the West Coast. Today, he was arresting a privileged college girl at a gas station because she'd been too entitled to pump her own gas. But as he placed the handcuffs on Madison Whitmore's wrists, he realized that both cases were really about the same thing. People who believed they were above the law, who thought their wealth and connections made them untouchable, who preyed on others without regard for the damage they caused. Agent Rodriguez, Madison said as he guided her toward his sedan. What's going to happen to me?